Well, let's get more now on these so-called ghost ships that the United States is engaged with at the moment. We can speak now to Lieutenant General Russell L. Honoré, retired three-star general and former commanding officer of the U.S. First Army. General Honoré, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And we've got very fast-moving developments at the moment. We've got these two vessels. There's the Marinera, which used to be called the Bella One. That's in the North Atlantic. Now the U.S. says it seized a second oil tanker called the Sophia in the Caribbean. I mean, these are called ghost ships. They're supposedly conducting illicit activities. What sort of activities would ships like this be engaged in?
As determined by the United States government, who's placed a ban on the export of oil from Venezuela on the open market, there are, in the U.S. perspective, there are legitimate legal restrictions on these ghost ships operating out of Venezuela and sending oil, which is the way they do it is one of the oldest constructs in ancient and modern world through contraband, as determined by the United States, and the judgment by the U.S. government that these ships should not be transporting fuel based on U.S. findings that the proceeds from those fuels from that oil was supporting an illegal government in Venezuela. All that is very contentious, whether the U.S. has authority to do it, but the difference is the U.S. has the capability to enforce whether this rule is accepted by the international community or not. But by and large, these are questionable acts, but they have been executed. And one of those tankers, as you know, was recently flying a Russian flag. So we're in some uncharted waters here as to where this thing will go in the future, whether the U.S. will retain full control of those ships. The good news is they were taken, according to current news, without any incidents. So they'll have to sort this out between whether Russia will stand up and wanted to retain control of that ship if it's properly documented to be a Russian flag ship. But at the end of the day, the U.S. is declaring this is illegal shipment of oil out of Venezuela.
Right. Well, we've just heard from the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth saying the blockade of sanctioned and illicit Venezuelan oil remains in full effect anywhere in the world. So he's giving the verbal message, and the clear message is the action taking place on the seas, as we speak. And the fact that Russia has sent a submarine to escort one of those oil tankers, doesn't that prove that it is, in fact, a Russian asset?
Not necessarily, because you're dealing with two very aggressive governments, the Russian government, which has been sending ghost ships out of Russia since the start of the Ukraine war, and sending oil all over the world. And many of that had been sanctioned by the U.S. and international community, to include NATO, but they still ship oil all over the world. And oil is now a big part of the contraband trade around the world.
Right, Russia seems to be sort of non-committal on this as well. We've heard Moscow saying the tanker was only temporarily flagged to Russia. However, no state has the right to use force against vessels properly registered in other countries' jurisdictions. This sounds like it's neither ours nor is it not ours kind of a message. Is that how you'd understand it?
Yeah, the diplomats got some work to do, and then we'll see how the international community, to include the U.S. and NATO, which are supporting the war in Ukraine, and is this another peg in the increasing tensions between Russia and the rest of the world, and whether the U.S. rules are has been executed by the U.S. government, will that stand up in world opinion? Oil is traded that way all the time, and more in recent years since the start of the Ukraine war. It's a part of the contraband trade.
Okay, I mean, given the situation we're in, where we've got, you know, the US operation to seize that tanker or somehow stop that tanker, or one of them, both of them, and a Russian presence as well in the form of a submarine and other vessels as well. I mean, are we looking at the risk, do you think, for confrontation between the United States and Russia here?
I think at the end of the day, this will be resolved, but who knows? Some junior officer out in the sea could take action to defend that ship, and we could end up with some escalation of direct combat between U.S. and Russian forces. That's the consequences of these actions. But I don't think Russia or the U.S. A hill they want to die on and start a World War III over one lowly tanker with oil on it. I think this will be resolved one way or the other, is what I'm hoping for. But rhetoric and social media posts could escalate this, and it's not that the two nations would make this decision, Moscow or Washington, D.C., to have a kinetic exchange over this ship. But what could happen by some officer at sea who think his last message was defend this ship at all costs, and we end up with a kinetic exchange or gunfire between Russian and U.S. naval assets. That is what I fear.
I mean, it sounds like the operation's gone pretty well so far from judging from what the U.S. has been saying. Homeland Security Secretary saying that the operation's been meticulously coordinated. There are these two operations, just to remind our viewers, where the U.S. Coast Guard has boarded these two Ghost Fleet tanker ships. I mean, does it sound like a risky sort of an operation from a military naval point of view, or does it sound pretty straightforward?
Well, anytime you board a ship at sea, they are risky operations. But how the world will see this is the U.S. pirating other people's property. At the same time, the U.S. position, which I can't refute, has been that these ships should not be leaving Venezuela with oil because of the restrictions the U.S. have put on these ships departing Venezuela, particularly in the current crisis going on in Venezuela. And the U.S. had publicly said, we're looking for these ships, we're going to stop them, and we're going to seize them because they're improperly flagged. And they are violating the U.S. restrictions to put pressure on Venezuela to become a part of the U.S. domination of the Western Hemisphere. So that is what's happening. I don't think, in my best judgment, that the two governments, again, this is a hill either one of them want to die on or start World War III over two tankers. I think this will be negotiated out and figure out what they're going to do with these two tankers. But this is not an immediate threat to start World War III over, but we should pay attention, and people should voice their concern to the U.S. government and to the Russian government that we need a sense of calm here and sort this out diplomatically or in international law as to what happened with these two tankers.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, the British Defence Ministry is saying that the UK was somehow involved in this operation that included some naval support, some aerial support, some RAF aircraft involved. I mean, is that quite typical that the United States and the United Kingdom would, join forces to some extent and support each other in these kinds of operations?
Absolutely, and that is what we call a combined naval operation going on in that area of the Atlantic. And there's always close cooperation between the U.S., UK, and NATO partners that have collectively said, hey, we're looking for these ships, and when we find them, we're going to stop them, we're going to seize them. So that is all done through bilateral and trilateral and multilateral operations in that part of the Atlantic.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us. Really appreciate it. Lieutenant General Russell L. Honoré, thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.